Alright, what's going on everyone? In this video, I'm going to show you how to upgrade the Dungeon Delving Magic Arena Starter Deck. We'll be upgrading it in 2 stages. First, I'll show you how you can upgrade it with only commons and uncommons, so you can upgrade it on a budget, and then I'll show you the rares and mythics you can use if you have a few extra wild cards, though I do caution you to spend those wisely as they are difficult to obtain. So, the Dungeon Delving deck is a deck built around the Forgotten Realms dungeon mechanic, or the venture mechanic, as you can see with things like Cloister Gargoyle, Nadar, and Veteran Dungeoneer. All of these allow you to venture into the dungeon, which essentially allows you to get all kinds of free value as you venture into them. Each time you venture, you get to choose a path, which gives you all kinds of triggers, all kinds of abilities. Plus, there are payoffs for completing those dungeons, like Cloister Gargoyle getting +3/+0, so it becomes a 3 mana 3/4 flyer, and Nadar will pump your entire team. So, lots of value for traversing through the dungeon, and then also you get all kinds of power upon completing them. The problem with the deck is it's just too watered down with cards that don't fit the theme. There's lots of stuff like Null Priest of Oblivion, Malakir Blood Priest, and Thunderous Orator, and these cards do synergize with the deck. There's a lot of party creature types, so the party mechanic works. There are a lot of keywords for the Orator. There's flying, there's death touch, stuff like that, and there is a minor reanimation theme, so it's not that these cards are bad, but there's just so much of it that you often have games where you just can't venture. You draw all these cards and your deck just doesn't do anything. So these cards are not bad, like I said, it's just that the deck has too much of this and it just falls apart and fails to work sometimes. So let's fix that. We'll start by taking out 2 demonic gifts and replacing them with 2 Fate's Reversal. These sort of do the same thing in that they return a creature from the graveyard. Demonic Gifts returns it straight to the battlefield, but you need to cast it when it dies or the turn it dies, and it's bad off the top of the deck if you don't have any creatures. Like if your board's empty and you draw this, it's just dead. Whereas Fate's Reversal, it's more universally useful, but it returns to hand. So there's a trade-off there, but the benefit of Fate's Reversal, the main reason we're playing it, is it also allows us to venture, and we just want more venturing in this deck, so it actually works. For the same reason, we're going to take out 1 Null Priest of Oblivion for a 4th Cloister Gargoyle. The Null Priest is actually a great card. I like it. I've played it in a lot of my decks, but in this deck, Cloister Gargoyle makes more sense. It ventures when you play it. It becomes a pretty good threat after you finish a dungeon, so would rather have Cloister Gargoyle here instead of the Null Priest. Though the Null Priest is great, feel free to play it in other decks. Next, we're going to take out Thor the Grave for a Veteran Dungeoneer. Thor the Grave is a solid card, but once again, we just need more venturing in this deck, and even though the Dungeoneer is a pretty so-so venture card, I would consider it fairly mediocre. I just really want to up the venture count. So even though it's kind of like a medium power card, I would consider it more of a draft card. We just want to add more venture cards in the deck, and this is kind of what we have to play just because there aren't enough cards in Standard, in Dungeons and Dragons, and Forgotten Realms to really support this deck. Kind of annoying, but it works, and it's better than Thor the Grave, I think, in this deck. Though Thor the Grave, pretty fantastic in party decks. We're also going to take out 2 Closing Statements for 2 Precipitous drops. Without question, don't mistake me here, Closing Statements is the better removal spell in like 99% of decks. However, the drops let us venture, and even though it's harder to kill creatures with it, it's an enchantment, so it can at least permanently shrink a creature. If you have a big creature on the battlefield that's causing you problems, you give it -2/-2 permanently, it lets you venture, and then if you finish a dungeon, it gives -5/-5, which actually kills a pretty significant portion of what's in Standard. And if it's on a creature, if it's on a big creature as a -2/-2 enchantment, it'll give it -5/-5 if you finish a dungeon and potentially just kill it off. So actually not that bad, decent in this deck, and we just need more venturing. And unfortunately, that's all we can really do in the comments and uncommon section of the video. There aren't a lot of great venture cards at this rarity. I mean, you could potentially add these skeletons. I'll put them on screen. The 4 mana 4/3 that ventures when it dies it's kind of clunky, but there just aren't really a ton of options for venturing at the common and uncommon rarity, unless you start adding extra colors like blue, but we're definitely not going to be going into blue with this upgrade guide. So let's move on to some of the rares we can use. First off, we can take out all 3 of the Fang Blades for 3 Nadars. Now do keep in mind, this is legendary, so playing 4 might be excessive. If you want, you can keep 1 Fang Blade and just play 3 Nadars, but personally, I like having 4 just because it's so powerful and I typically want to attack with it to trigger the venture, so it does die, and it's really good when it's in play because it pumps our team. So I'm willing to play 4 because I want it in play, but I also want to attack with it, so it does die. It's better than the Fang Blade. It triggers on entering and attacking, which the Fang Blade only triggers on dealing damage to a player. It's bigger, and also it gives us a big payoff for finishing a dungeon, so just better. Much better. We're also going to take out 2 Malakir Blood Priests for 2 Triumphant Adventurers. These give us a 2-drop that can venture, which is pretty great. And remember that when it attacks, it has First Strike and Death Touch. It already has Death Touch, and then it will gain First Strike. It gains First Strike on your turn. So when you're attacking, if the opponent blocks it, their creature will die, and the adventurer won't, because it's going to deal its damage first, have Death Touch, and just kill the creature before it can deal damage back, unless their creature has First Strike. So it's basically going to kill anything that blocks it, so your opponents are really not going to want to block this thing, and then it just ventures when it attacks, so that's pretty good. And for the same reason, we'll take out 1 of the Thunderous Orators for a 4th Triumphant Adventurer. The Orators are fine, but we just want more Venture, and Venture is Triumphant Adventurer's middle name. Wait, no, whatever. The point is, much better. So the Thunderous Orator is just kind of meh. Sometimes it gets Flying and Death Touch, but it's whatever. In terms of mana, you can replace the 4 Sinkholes with 4 Snarls. Now, the Snarls aren't considered to be great dual lands, as they often enter tapped when we don't want them to, but they're better than the Sinkholes since those always enter tapped, right? Even if the Snarls enter the battlefield tapped 80% of the time, that's less than 100% of the time, so marginally better. You can also replace a few basics with the Pathways. These are actually good dual lands, because why play a Plains or a Swamp when you can play a Pathway that can be either or, depending on which one you need, right? Makes sense. And at that point, we're mostly done. There are still a few problems, like the deck still has 2 Orators. I don't love the Ranger's Hawks, and the removal is a little all over the place. So if you want to, you can replace the Orators with Luminarch Aspirants. Neither of these venture, right? Orator doesn't venture, the Aspirants don't venture, but the Aspirants are incredibly powerful. Most opponents will kill it on sight, which is good because it means they won't kill your venture stuff, and if the opponent can't kill the aspirant, it can just snowball out of control after a few turns. So if you can't fill the deck with enough venture cards, you might as well play something that's like actually a threat, and Luminarch Aspirant, you've probably played against it, and it gets very annoying very fast, and you really need to kill it, so that's pretty good, and it's better than this Orator thing. You can also try replacing the Thor the Grave with however you pronounce this thing. I'm not a huge fan of it, but some decks do go all in on completing the Tomb of Annihilation with like 3 or 4 copies of this thing. I tried it, I don't like it, because if you haven't completed the Tomb, it's just such a bad card. It's the type of card that I'm okay with playing 1, maybe 2, but like I definitely don't want 3 or 4. It just feels really bad in your opening hand. So I prefer to focus on the Lost Mine first, since the token and the +1/+1 counter are useful in the early game, plus the scry right at the beginning, great in the early game. But you can definitely try going all in on Tomb of Annihilation with this, but I didn't like it personally. Anyway, that is the deck for now. I do encourage you to look into other lists, just in case new cards are released in the future that are better for this deck. But what we have now is definitely much more powerful and definitely much more consistent than what we started with. The original deck had such a hard time completing dungeons, but now we should be completing them very quickly and then getting a really large board of gargoyles and nadars and stuff to finish the opponent off. This deck is much more consistent at getting through dungeons quickly and then producing big powerful threats as a result. So should be much more powerful, should be much more consistent, shouldn't feel as watered down. So overall, pretty happy with where we're at, even if I wish there were just a couple more good playable venture cards. Definitely better than where we started. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Consider leaving a like if it was and subscribing for more, as I will be upgrading all 10 starter decks in the future. But in the meantime, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one.